Okay, I'm started recording. So welcome everybody. Happy Friday. Thank you for joining us. This is our 6th year. We just decided of doing this workshop for graduate students in the biomedical sciences. And we're actually, I think, because it's by Zoom now, we can include people from all of the SGS campuses. So I'm glad to make it as accessible as possible. And the purpose of today's, so first of all, I'm Janet Alder. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an assistant dean in the School of Graduate Studies. And I am on the New Brunswick Piscataway campus. Carol Lutz, who is going to be speaking a little bit, is an associate dean up at the New Jersey Health Sciences, Newark Health Sciences campus. The goal of today's workshop is to really help you understand the fellowship application process. So we do other workshops throughout the year, which are more focused on writing specific aims and other aspects of the grant application itself. But today is to understand, the big picture, how to approach identifying fellowship opportunities, how to approach interacting with your PI on developing the project and the timeline and what the review process will be like. So it's a little bit more of a global picture, not necessarily the nuts and bolts, although you will be meeting students and faculty who have successfully obtained fellowships from a number of agencies, and they can be a great resource to you, as well as Carol and I can be in terms of the nuts and bolts. So I hope you join us in the spring when we do our specific aims writing workshop to get you launched on that part. So the way that today's workshop will run is that first, Teresa Del Corso Elman from School of Graduate Studies, but specifically from GradFund. She's the director of GradFund, is going to talk about GradFund and the resources that they offer, which I urge you all to take advantage of. Then Dr. Carol Lutz is going to talk about the reviewer's perspective on how fellowships are evaluated. And then we'll have 4 pairs of panelists: NIH, NSF, New Jersey Commission on Cancer Research, and American Heart Association, a student and a PI from each of those who have successfully obtained grants in recent years. So we'll have them each share their perspective, and we hope that this is interactive. So if anytime you have a question, please feel free to type it in the chat, and I will moderate and ask as appropriate. Okay, we're good to go? All right. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Teresa to talk about GradFund.
Okay, great. Thank you, Janet. Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see you. I'm going to talk about GradFund and the way that we assist and support students with their fellowship and grant applications. So I have some slides to share with you. So I'm going to go ahead and start the slide share. Okay, and let me get this into presentation mode. Okay, yep, there we go. Okay, great. So what I'm going to do is give you an overview of GradFund services and the ways that we work with graduate students to help them develop competitive fellowship and grant applications. So we are a service of the School of Graduate Studies, and our mission is to help students apply for fellowships and grants. We are now in our 21st year. We were founded in 2000, and in that time, a real conservative estimate is that we've helped our graduate students win over $100 million in external support. And the reason I put up that data point is to share with you that this is something that you can do, that this, $100+ million in external funding over 20 some years really represents a lot of graduate students applying for funding successfully. And the way many of them started the process was by attending an event such as this one, where they learned about an overview of how we can help you, what are the options that are out there, hearing about best practices from peers and faculty mentors, and that's really what launched them on the pathway to writing a fellowship application that was ultimately funded. So I encourage all of you to plan to do that in the next foreseeable future, whether it's this year or next year. A goal that I like to set for all graduate students is to encourage them to think about applying for at least one fellowship or grant each year that they're in graduate school. And it's something that is good to practice. And it is very true that if you don't apply for funding, you won't secure external funding. So the ways in which we help our graduate students is through a set of core services. And in the next set of slides, I'll go through them in a bit more detail. But I also want to say here that the way we organize our support is designed first to be complementary to the support that you're receiving inside of your graduate program through programs such as this, by working with your PI, by using the local expertise that resides in your programs. So we want to complement that. We don't want to replicate it. And so the way we approach serving students is on a multidisciplinary and peer review perspective. So what that means is that I have working with me a team of graduate students who've been trained to be peer mentors and fellowship advisors. So they have experience applying for funding. They know how challenging it can be. They know how rewarding it is. They're advanced doctoral candidates, and they go through a competitive selection process, and then they're trained in terms of how to work with peers across disciplinary boundaries. So what that means is that when you're meeting with a fellowship advisor from GradFund, you're going to be meeting with somebody who's from outside of your discipline. And what they're going to be able to help you figure out is, how do you clearly communicate these ideas to somebody from outside of your discipline? So it will complement the work that you're doing inside of your program with your PI, who can help you understand how to best communicate these ideas to the specialists in your field. But a goal when you're writing a funding application is that it really needs to speak to multiple audiences at the same time. So, you really want to take advantage of getting feedback from expert readers such as your faculty, but also from grad funders who will be able to help you see, if you're not working in your specific field, what's a term or a concept that maybe needs to be explained a bit differently so it is more broadly accessible. So to get a little more detail into the types of services that we offer graduate students, I would say our most popular service are our individual appointments. So the GradFund team is back on campus working in our offices, but we're doing all of our meetings with students virtually through either WebEx or Zoom. So I encourage everyone to schedule individual appointments. The way our appointments are set up, we have 3 different types of appointments, really designed to help navigate you through the process of applying for funding. So a lot of students start out with what we call a planning meeting, which is where through screen shares, we will show you how to use the GradFund database, how to use the Pivot database, and how to begin to set up searches and to understand the results that you're getting so that you can identify different fellowships and grants that are available to you to apply for during your graduate study. A help with the funder meeting is usually a next step, and that can be when you've identified a specific award, but maybe it's a bit confusing when you look at the application process, or it seems a bit overwhelming. And a lot of times students will report, this is just too confusing, I'm not going to bother doing it. And before you decide to abandon the project, we want you to come and schedule a help with a funder meeting with us. So that way we can help you understand how to navigate this application process. What are the things that you need to assemble? What are the writing strategies you want to think about so that we can help you initiate this application and ultimately be successful? And then an application review appointment is going to be a chance to share with us the application essays that you're developing and to get feedback from a GradFund advisor. And so once again, what we're going to be doing is looking at this material and giving feedback as the non-expert reader. And so we're going to help you figure out how to most clearly communicate your research ideas, make sure you're speaking to the funder's goals, make sure you're speaking to the review criteria. We'll also bring to the table the insights that we have from many of these competitions after years of studying them, and what are the tips that we know in terms of what works, what doesn't work, and to help you make this as strong as possible. So just a couple of screenshots in terms of logistics. To book an appointment, you want to use our WC Online platform. And the way you're going to do that is to actually go to my.rutgers.edu and go to your dashboard there. And what you want to do is make sure that you've got the GradFund widget on your dashboard. So if you don't have that, what you want to do is you want to add it, which means you go to My Dashboard, you click on the little cross inside of the circle, and what that's going to do is pull up a window where you can search on widgets, and you can add the GradFund widget. And so if you search on GradFund, it'll appear, you can add it. And then what that means is that that's on your My Rutgers dashboard, and you'll have a place where you can click to make an appointment that will authenticate you through the Rutgers system and allow you to see our schedule so that you can book an appointment. And when you go in to book an appointment, you can choose the date, the time, the advisor, the type of appointment that you want. It is important to keep in mind that for all GradFund appointments, when you book the appointment, you need to confirm the appointment, and you do that by uploading meeting materials. And for the planning meeting and the help with the funder meeting, what we need is a copy of your CV. So a really good strategy is when you're booking that meeting, just go ahead and upload your CV, and you're all set for either that planning meeting or help with the funder meeting. For the application review meeting, we'll need a copy of the essays you would like for us to look at. And we need the materials 2 days before your appointment is scheduled. So you'll just want to make a note to make sure you're uploading the essays that you want us to look at by 9 a.m. 2 days before your meeting. You can set up inside a WC Online to be sent reminders either through email or text, but you want to make sure that we have those documents, because unfortunately, if we don't have the documents, we need to cancel your appointment. And we typically have pretty long wait lists, especially during the fall semester. And so if that appointment is canceled, it will go to somebody on the wait list, and it won't be possible to get you back into that slot. So I just like to mention that just to make sure everyone's aware that you do want to start to assemble documents and be prepared to upload them at the latest 2 days before the appointment is scheduled. I also want to share with you a screenshot of the GradFund website, and I have a bunch of links to share with you. So after I'm done with the presentation, I'll drop a number of different GradFund related links into the chat so you can access this information easily. On the GradFund website, you can access our award database and search for funding opportunities. That's also something that during a planning meeting, a GradFund advisor can help you understand how to navigate the search and interpret the results that you're getting. I also want to highlight that this past summer, we released on Canvas the GradFund Self-Paced Guide to Fellowships and Grants. And this is a great new resource that I encourage all of you to go ahead and enroll in, and then you can work through the material at your own pace. There's a lot of information on how do you begin to build a list of fellowships and grants that you want to apply for. How do you prepare to apply? There's writing guides and tips for writing the application materials. We have some instructional videos that can give you some additional insights. We have some in-depth information on key awards, including things like the NSF GRF. So it's a really rich space in terms of content and resources. And I encourage everyone to make use of it and use it as you know, one of your tools as you're working on fellowship and grant opportunities. In addition to the Canvas site, we also have some additional resources and information on Rutgers Connect, and that will include a copy of this PowerPoint presentation. So you also want to make sure that you're taking advantage of the information that's housed there as well. We offer a number of different webinars. So we've recently announced our fall 2021 webinar series. You've got the link there where you can see the full schedule. The full schedule is also posted on the WC Online site. All of the webinars are taking place on Zoom, and we've got lots of different choices, kind of trying to fit everyone's need at different stage and in terms of different learning levels of applying for fellowships and grants. The sessions, we encourage you, if your schedule allows for you to attend live, please do, but they also are recorded, and the recordings will be posted to the RU Connect space. So you'll be able to access that content later on. And then finally, the last thing I just want to mention is the Pivot database, which is a commercial database that the university subscribes to that has a lot of really rich information in terms of fellowship and grant opportunities. So we have the GradFund database, which is something that we've created, which you can easily access on our website. But that is very much a homegrown affair. So it's great, but it's limited in functionality, and the updates have a bit of a lag because we're doing it ourselves. And so Pivot is a nice complement to this. Pivot is a commercial database that the university subscribes to. So it's quite robust in terms of content, in terms of features. You do want to make sure when you go in and search as a graduate student that you specify you're looking for awards specifically for graduate students. Otherwise, you'll start getting awards that are relevant to faculty, and that's going to, just kind of be a distraction at this point. So you can go in and set up a lot of different search criteria to give you information that's relevant to your current stage of study. A couple of things that I really like about it is that you can set it up to send you weekly email alerts when new awards come in that map to your search criteria, or if one of the awards that you're tracking has an update, that will be sent to you automatically by email. Another really nice feature is that you can build an award list and you can import the calendar with the deadlines into your own personal calendar. So that works really nicely just in terms of staying on top of deadlines. So this is one of the things that a grad fund advisor will assist you with when you schedule a planning meeting, is to give you an introduction to Pivot and how to set up the search that maps to your research interests, how to use the different functions that are available, and to how to interpret the results that you're getting so that you understand, if something's not really what you're looking for, how can you begin to adjust the search criteria. My next screenshot here just is to show you when you go to set up a Pivot account, you're going to be presented with two different pathways, and you want to choose the use email, create password pathway rather than the institutional login credential pathway. And then, so finally, I just want to wrap up with a couple of next steps to think about in terms of GradFund, which would be to visit all of the GradFund digital resources. Like I said, I'll put those into the chat for you so you have those links. Plan to attend our webinars that we have ongoing throughout the fall semester, whether it's in real time or on your own schedule by watching the recordings. I encourage all of you to set up a Pivot account and create a profile and use that resource. And of course, to also plan to schedule GradFund appointments wherever you are in the process of applying for funding. Schedule the appointment that meets your needs, and we look forward to working with you one-on-one. So thank you. I will stop the share.
Thank you, Teresa. So a couple things I'd like to just draw out. So first of all, why do we think it's important for graduate students? You said you encourage them all to apply to a fellowship, one per year. Let's talk about why is it important for graduate students to have fellowships and, for their current or their future careers.
Right. So, so that's a really great question. So I want to start out by saying that, in addition to encouraging students to apply for at least one fellowship or grant each year, I also encourage them to think about how can you integrate the process of applying for funding into your graduate career. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And it gets to answering this question of why should you be doing this? And so you're pursuing a research degree. And what this means, of course, is that you're going to be doing research for the rest of your career, which means you're going to be applying for funding for the rest of your career. So one really important reason to do this is the very practical. You want to gain the practice and the experience of applying for funding. You want to understand how to navigate this world, how to put together an application, what the requirements are, and to see it as a professional development activity that's part of your doctoral training, because it's a skill that you'll use throughout your career. And then this is a good thing to do because in addition to that, gaining that practice, there's a good chance you'll be successful. And if you're successful, that can have a transformative impact on your graduate career. It brings additional resources into your research. It brings acknowledgement of merit and prestige to your work. It becomes a line on your CV. And it will become the pathway to securing future research funds, whether that's as a graduate student or as a postdoc or further down the road. So it's a real important foundational experience to have as a graduate student. The other thing that's important to keep in mind is that, the answer to the question of, well, what can I apply for? Is it really depends on the individual. That, you're going to hear about a number of different key awards in the life sciences and the biomedical sciences that lots of people can apply for. But the reality is that everyone's going to have their own individual list of things they can apply for. And that's where GradFund can help with the planning meeting. And part of what we want to help you figure out is not only what can you apply for right now, but what can you apply for down the road, and to think about some short-term planning and long-term planning. And this idea of integrating applying for funding into your graduate career, it's about figuring out how to make time to work on this as you're juggling everything else that you're doing. But it's also about, as you move through your graduate program requirements, you're moving in and out of eligibility for different awards. And so you want to have this broader perspective of what can you apply for at different career stages, both in terms of your graduate study, but also beyond, so you don't miss out on really key opportunities that will be, instrumental in terms of supporting you at different stages of research development, but also will become career defining moments for you and will help to launch the career that you want to have.
Thank you. And I would just add 2 points to that. One is, even if you're not interested in an academic career and you say, well, I'm not going to be writing grants because I'm going into industry or nonprofit, whatever. The truth is that future employers like to see that you are productive and that you can see a project through to completion and that you're independent and that you think logically and clearly about projects. So all of those things are demonstrated through successful application and obtaining of external funding. So you can capitalize on these fellowships in many different ways in your future. The second thing I would like to add is that one way to sort of lessen the pain, as it were, of applying for external fellowships is potentially to use your proposition exam, if many of you are in programs that require a qualifying exam that is a proposal for your thesis, and that is then reviewed by your faculty advisory committee for your thesis committee. Then use that as the template for applying for an external fellowship. You've already done the work of thinking through the aims and the project and everything. So it's very easy for the most part to repackage that and send it out to various funding agencies. So don't think that you're going to have a really heavy lift. Sometimes just writing your proposal for your thesis is the heavy lift, and then writing the application is not so hard. The other thing I'd like to ask Teresa before we switch over, unless other people have questions, is to enlighten us about, and I know you alluded to this, that not everybody will be eligible for every application, that everybody will have a unique list. And so can you just talk about international students for a minute, because we do have a lot here.
Right, sure. So yes, I would say the biggest myth out there is that international students can't apply for external funding, that there's nothing for them. And that's not true. What is true is that there are certain awards that will require the applicant is a US citizen or permanent resident. But there's also plenty of other awards that are open to all graduate students, regardless of where they're from. There'll be other awards that are actually specifically for international students. So what I tend to see in the awards portfolio is that awards that are for students in the early stages of their graduate career, like in their first or second year, more of those tend to require that the applicant is a US citizen or permanent resident. But as you move closer to dissertation stage, those citizenship requirements fall away. And part of the logic behind this is that early on, it's about supporting an individual and their potential. And later at the dissertation stage, it's about supporting the project and the individual who is doing it. And so they're not as concerned about it has to be somebody who is from the United States, that they, as long as they're enrolled in a US based institution and doing the work, in a US based lab, they're interested in funding the graduate student. So those are just some quick tips about kind of how to think about this if you're an international student. Don't assume because it's federal funding from the US government that you're not eligible as an international student, because you may not be, but you could be, and you want to look carefully at the eligibility requirements. And that's the key thing. Always look at the eligibility requirements. If it's not clear, don't be afraid to ask. Don't prematurely remove yourself from consideration by assuming that you're not eligible. And that, this is, I will also say that, this is understanding how to navigate the funding landscape is complicated, and it can function in the United States differently than it does in other countries. So this is also where the GradFund advising team can help you learn how to navigate this and understand how it functions here in the US. And as an international student, how to best identify the opportunities that you're eligible for.
And I just want to put in a plug for Teresa and for GradFund that I know many students who have, although been reluctant maybe to seek out their help, have really benefited from it. My own PhD student ended up applying for a Fulbright fellowship at the end of her graduate career. She's an MD PhD. GradFund was extremely helpful with her. She successfully obtained a Fulbright and has been in Switzerland for the last 2 years, actually. Because of COVID, she got an extended year. I'll have to say, in Teresa's presence, I'll say this, I get some people saying, well, I don't think GradFund is going to be helpful because they're not in my field and they're not going to understand the science. And I would advocate strongly that you seek them out because they're not in your field and because they can help you translate a very complex concept that even reviewers who are in your field get bogged down in. Your science so well that you write it in a language that others can't read, and reviewers are going to be reading piles of these. So to make it as easy for them as possible, GradFund can help with that. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Carol, who's going to talk about the reviewer's perspective going through piles of applications. Thank you, Teresa.
Yes, thank you, Janet. I'm going to make sure, can everybody see that? You can see it. Oh, terrific. So thank you so much, Teresa. Thank you so much, Janet.
Although it's a little cut off at the edges. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know why.
Okay.
I'm just seeing that. I don't think it'll be a problem.
Okay.
I don't think it'll be a major problem. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Carol Lutz. As Janet mentioned, I'm the Associate Dean for Student Affairs on the Newark Health Science campus. I'm a faculty member at NJMS. I do run a research lab, but today I'm going to be talking about fellowship review. And I've been a long time reviewer for the American Heart Association. I currently chair a fellowship studies section for the American Heart Association. I also serve on an NSF studies section panel. I've done that in the past, and I previously served on a panel and chaired NIH study section. So I have lots and lots of years of fellowship review. So as mentioned previously, I'm going to be talking about the review aspect and what you can expect from that, and also what happens behind the scenes. And let's see if I can make this. It's not advancing. Hold on. Let me see. Maybe I'll have to do it like this. I apologize. Let me try one more time to see. Okay, it was just the first time. Okay, good. So the thing that I want to make sure that everybody really understands here is that fellowships are training vehicles. The science is really important, but unlike the grants that your mentor will write, such as an NIH R01 or other research grants, the training potential of your experience is just as important. And it's never too early to be thinking about opportunities. As Teresa mentioned, look at the GradFund website, think about it. They have all sorts of different amazing opportunities to help you out. So I'm going to transition from this slide into the next slide, and that is that, well, if science is only part of what gets scored, what else is going to get scored in my fellowship application? You, as the applicant, are roughly 1/3 of the application score. That means what your grades are, what your CV looks like, what types of experience do you have. There's oftentimes in an application an opportunity for you to write a personal statement that talks about what it is that you would like to do in your chosen career, and how receipt of this application is going to help with that. So roughly the applicant, his or herself or themselves, is going to be approximately 1/3 of the application score, or of the fellowship score. Another third is primarily made up of the mentor, co-mentor, or co-mentor, and I'll come back to that in a minute, as well as the training plan. And the training plan has to do with how your mentor or your mentor plus your co-mentor can help to advance your training relevant to your articulated career path. You don't have to say that you want to be an academic researcher. That is a common misconception. It's really, though, important that you articulate why that the work that you're going to do is going to help prepare you for whatever career path that is. That might be teaching, that might be R&D at a pharmaceutical company, but it's really important that you articulate that well. And for those students who are MD PhDs, the training plan is also going to be important to talk about your clinical, how this is going to articulate with your clinical training as well. So back to the idea of mentor and co-mentor. Sometimes students may be working on a project that's collaborative between your lab and another lab, perhaps at Rutgers or perhaps at another institution. The advantage of a co-mentor is that you can have additional people to help you in that training process. They might be experts in a particular technique or in a particular field that is broadening the perspective of your own lab. One good example might be if you are in a lab that is primarily a molecular biology lab or a neuroscience lab. Maybe if you're partnering with somebody who's in computer science or bioinformatics to help broaden the field that you get. So that's one option for a co-mentor. I should also add that if you will be working with somebody who is a new faculty member, it's a great idea to enlist the help of a co-mentor, because that will help not only your new mentor get his or her feet wet and all with getting you properly trained, but also ensure that you have the proper training and the proper expertise in order to be successful in completing your PhD. And then finally,
I just want to emphasize that. I know that a lot of students do get criticized for working with junior faculty who don't have a co-mentor, because the training record of the mentor becomes important in the evaluation.
Yes, and I will tell you, if you think that the review panel will overlook this, you would be wrong, because they will see it. So please be proactive and think about this ahead of time. Again, you can talk to me, you can talk to Janet, you can talk to Teresa, you can talk to your mentor, you can talk to a lot of people about the best way to make this happen. And then finally, the environment is part of the overall score. But I'll tell you that the breakdown usually works out to the applicant being 1/3, the mentor, co-mentor, training plan, environment being roughly another third, and then finally the science that you write. So the science is really only 1/3 of the overall application score that you would get. So how to get started? The first way I definitely recommend is going through GradFund. Look through them, talk with them, look at the website, but you can also look for opportunities in your area of research. You can talk to your mentor about what he or she or they recommend. There are some that are local, such as New Jersey Commission on Cancer Research, New Jersey Spinal Cord Initiative, there's a brain health initiative. So there are some local executive women of New Jersey. There's a number of local areas that you can look in. Some from professional societies. I just learned within the last month about the American Association of Immunologists actually funds some predoctoral fellowships. So you can look at professional societies that may have these and talk to your mentor about it. The National Institutes of Health, we've mentioned several times, NSF, National Science Foundation, and a number of other government agencies. The NSF has some very strict time requirements. You can only apply to the NSF for the graduate research fellowships in your first or second year of graduate school. You can also apply as a senior in college, but since all of you are now grad students, that's not an option for you right now. So you can apply your first or second year and approach me, or we'll also have a panelist that talks about NSF a little bit later on. So again, that's only one time a year. Some of these have multiple application deadlines. Some only have one time a year. NSF is due, I believe, in October. So again, there's some specific criteria that you have to meet, and you also cannot have a master's degree to be eligible for the NSF. There are other agencies such as the American Heart Association and a number of other agencies that you can reach out to. And of course, as I mentioned before, GradFund. So let's now imagine for a minute, we're now not going to talk so much about writing the application because we're now going to assume that you've written the application and you've submitted it. So what happens next? The next step is that the proposal is going to get assigned to a group based on subject matter. Sometimes you can ask for it to be assigned to a particular study section. Sometimes you don't. It really depends on the funding agency for this. Then it is assigned to a subgroup or some subsection. And for the NIH, there's a scientific review officer who is a PhD, and they are tasked with organization of a study section or a grant review panel. In some other agencies, such as the American Heart Association, the person who is tasked with organizing the study section or grant review panel is not a PhD, and he or she is very reliant on the chairs of the study section to organize that, in addition to some of their tried and true reviewers. So for example, as a chair of an AHA study section panel right now, my co-chair and I were tasked with doing the heavy lifting of organizing the panel, and the AHA staff support person sent the invitations, but we provided names to her. So each agency is a little bit different. NSF also has a PhD level person who organizes these. The scientific review officer or the panel chair will assign applications to reviewers based on their expertise. And sometimes, depending on the study section, it may be very broad, such as my AHA study section is broad. It's in the area of gene expression. So that's pretty broad, whereas the NIH may have things that are much more specific. So again, it somewhat depends. Reviewers for the panel, as I was helping to organize my panel, have to be knowledgeable, subject expert. But for my panel, they also had to represent a broad area. So we had people who were interested not only in gene expression from an animal point of view, but also were able to talk about GWAS associations and genomics and bioinformatics. So molecular and genomic and bioinformatic expertise is required on my subject panel. So it depends on your panel. They also have to be, just generally speaking, impartial and unemotional. They need to be fair, objective, and accurate in how they write their reviews. They need to be critical, but not hypercritical. They need to be logical and able to communicate their ideas. They need to be reliable because you only have a short window of time to read, score, and write the reviews, and you need to be able to have them show up on time. Many study sections, in fact, most study sections are meeting virtually now. Some of them met virtually for years and years and years. Some of them in the past met in person and are in sort of a hybrid holding pattern now. A reviewer also needs to be able to write a helpful, readable review that helps you, the applicant, understand why it was awarded or not and how you can make it better in the future. And they also need to be able to assess novelty. So the study section logistics. Each reviewer has a number of applications to read and write reviews of. That might be, 5 to 7, it might be 10 to 12, it might be, in the case of NSF, 30 to 40. It just really sort of depends on the panel and the study section. So as Janet and Teresa mentioned previously, the reviewer needs to be able to read and assess what you have written in a very clear manner. So you need to be able to have it written in such a manner that is going to make the reviewer easy to read and assess what you're planning to do. Each reviewer is going to have a relatively short window of time to read and write reviews on them, 4 to 6 weeks usually, not a whole lot of time. As mentioned previously, they will meet in person or via Zoom or via teleconference, depending on the agency. Each application has 3 reviewers, usually named reviewers 1, 2, and 3. And in the actual meeting on that day, the applications will be scored by everyone on the panel. So there's a presentation by reviewer 1, reviewer 2 will also add some points, and reviewer 3 will add some points as well. Then there's discussion from the whole panel, and everybody scores the application. The review panel does not determine fundability, only scoring. The funding is determined by a different set of people. I should also note that only approximately 50% of applications are going to be discussed. Those applications with non-competitive scores will receive full written reviews, but will not be discussed in order to allow more time for discussion of competitively scored applications. So if you get a not discussed score on your fellowship application, please don't be discouraged, because there are lots and lots of students and applicants who will receive this. But you'll receive a full written score, and you should use that and look at it carefully of how you can best write it in order to get it funded the next go round. Most applications are allowed at least one resubmission. It depends on the agency, but again, most have at least one resubmission is allowed. So we've talked already a little bit about these scored review criteria. This is from the NIH. So an F30 application is a dual degree. That could be MD, PhD, that could be DPT, PhD, that could be DMD, PhD, that could be some kind of dual degree. An F31 is a predoctoral fellowship for PhD students, and an F32 is a postdoctoral fellowship. So we already mentioned some of the review criteria on the left-hand side of the slide. The fellowship applicant, the sponsors, meaning the mentors, collaborators and consultants. Research training plan means here the science. The training potential has to do with the training plan for you, the applicant, and the institutional environment and commitment to training. Additional review criteria get factored into the overall impact score, but don't get separate scores for human subjects, vertebrate animals, biohazards, and a resubmission if you have submitted it before your response to the reviewer's critique. So the overall impact score is not an average of an individual criterion scores. It's a separate assessment for the likelihood of the fellowship to promote the candidate's potential for and commitment to an independent scientific research career in consideration of the scored and additional review criteria. So again, it's not an average. Different reviewers may weight something a little bit more heavily than something else. So here, again, this is the NIH scoring criteria. The American Heart Association and many other associations have adopted the same criteria. NSF has a very different scoring chart, with 50 being the best and 1 being the worst. At least that is the way that it previously was. It may change. And so it really varies from agency to agency what kind of score it is. So the merit assessment here. So if you get a score of 1, that's the best possible score. The score of 9 is the worst possible score. And here's what a 1 means versus what a 7, 8, or 9 mean. That a 1, 2, or 3 mean no weaknesses or very negligible weaknesses that will not affect training. Again, 1 is the highest. That's a high impact score. A medium impact score is a good application with some minor weaknesses. So if you get a score of 4, that is still a medium impact application, which is a good application. It doesn't mean that your application is bad in any way. It's just we get so many applications that it's difficult to give. You can't give everybody possibly a 1. So this is the overall research training value of the application. And just a little bit more from the NIH about its impact on an applicant's training and development. I'll just, because I know that this is kind of small for you, the high impact applications with scores 1, 2, or 3 propose training or career development of high value or benefit for the candidate who has high potential for developing into a productive, independent scientist, may have some or no weaknesses in the criteria. The medium impact proposes training or career development of high or moderate value or benefit within that score of 4, 5, or 6. But further development or weaknesses of the criteria reduce the impact from high to medium. And there also may be moderate value or benefit from the candidate who shows moderate potential, and again, may have some weaknesses. And the low impact proposes training or career development of moderate or low value benefit. There are probably weaknesses in the criteria which reduce enthusiasm or reduce the overall impact to low. So the fellowship review focus summary, the review that is written that is you will receive should focus on the training value of the application and its impact on this applicant's scientific development. You will get comments on the applicant's potential for an independent scientific research career, the applicant's need for the proposed training, the sponsor's training experience, funding, and commitment, the level of integration of the research and training plans to provide high quality productive research training, the quality of the research environment, and the overall score decision, or the overall impact score decision is the potential of the application to promote the applicant's scientific development and prepare the candidate for research independence.
Carol, there are a couple questions. Oh, perfect.
And that's the last slide for questions. And there's my email address if anybody has further questions that you'd like to take offline. So with that, I will stop my share and happy to answer any questions.
So what are typical weaknesses? Grace wants to know, like, what are the usual downfalls?
Okay, so usual downfalls might be that an applicant proposes far more than he or she could do for his or her scientific PhD training. So I'll tell you, sometimes people will propose enough science for an entire lab for 5 years. So over ambitious. That is something that we see very, very frequently. Another thing that the flip side of that I have seen sometimes is under ambitiousness. You propose to do 1 or 2 experiments, not enough for your PhD work. So those are things that are weaknesses. Another weakness may be that as we've mentioned, that the faculty member is very junior and does not have a track record of training. And so that's where an easy thing to fix is to have a co-mentor. Another weakness that you might see is that the mentor does not have independent funding. A way to fix that is to get some sort of statement from perhaps the department chair or the graduate school that they are willing to help support the student.
Right. I just want to, sorry, while you're there, just point out that a lot of times these fellowships support your tuition and stipend, but often don't have very much research money, ironically. So that's why Dr. Lutz is saying that, having your PI have a grant that is related or somewhat overlapping, and that's another thing to talk about with what you're proposing, is helpful.
Right, because if you don't have money for supplies, then you're not going to be very successful in doing your experiments. Overlap. So Janet mentioned overlap. So a lot of times a question may arise as to the overlap between the fellowship application that you're putting forward and the mentor's NIH grant. And I say, it's fair. It's absolutely fair to ask that question. It's also absolutely fair for you to say, I am working on an aspect of my mentor's NIH application, but I also developed this part of the project since that application was funded, and it may take it in a new direction or something like that, that you may do that. A lot of times grants are funded sometime previously for you to, before you're writing this application. And so there may be new data that suggests that a hypothesis maybe need to be altered slightly. So that's another thing for overlap. So I hope that answers. This is just a few of the weaknesses that come to mind. Another thing that I will tell you that I see very often, that students don't highlight themselves enough on their CV that is submitted. So if you have worked on if you have authored a paper, make sure you put it. If you have been to a scientific conference, make sure you put it down, even if it's an undergraduate conference. You know, those are types, abstracts, presentations are really important and often overlooked. So toot your own horn a little bit.
I had another question in the chat, and then I have a question too. What
Sure.
is usually a fundable score?
Depends on the study section, depends on the applicant pool. Again, remember, the study section does not determine funding. There's another level of review beyond that. Usually things with 1s and 2s are prime candidates in the NIH scoring system for being funded. Depending on the panel, the AHA may also fund 1s and 2s. They may go to 3s. It really just depends on how the panel scores things. I will tell you that usually panels skew towards scoring things in a favorable range, and sometimes have to recalibrate their scores downward in order to get a broad range, because not everybody can receive a 1 or a 2.
And just so you know, you'll get both a score as well as a percentile from
Correct.
NIH. So the
Correct.
percentile is sometimes the one that's more reflective, like there was a time where it was only 10% or lower. Maybe now that there's more NIH funding, they would be scoring in the 12, 13, 14 range. So it really depends on the.
And the percentile also depends on how many applications are received. So I know that right now NIH is receiving way more applications than they used to, not just with fellowships, but in general. So it depends, the percentile depends on the number of applications as well as the score, the overall score. And remember, the reviewers that are scoring the discussed applications are going to score everything based on the discussion that goes on about that particular application.
Then I just wanted to point out one other thing about preliminary data. How important is that for the reviewers?
Preliminary data, I think, it depends. You are not expected to have preliminary data. If you have preliminary data, it's great, it's supportive. It does not have to be from you, but you ought to cite where it comes from. If it comes from your lab, make sure that you are saying, you know, this came from work Smith et al., and, you know, cite the publication. Make sure that you are citing where it comes from. And to speak to something that was mentioned previously, remember, you can, when you're talking about the preliminary data, when you're talking about the introduction, remember that you might have content experts that are reading what it is that you're talking about, but you might not have content experts. So that's why having people like in GradFund that are reading this, be able to ascertain clarity of what it is that you're proposing is really important. But back to the preliminary data, it's really quite important that you talk about what is yours and talk about what may have come from the lab.
Thanks. And Lauren Runnels, thank you, Lauren, just put in the chat the pay lines for some of the institutes. I see Mark has his hand up, but before we get to Mark, Melissa asked, do you know how long it takes to receive a summary of your application review, and any tips on reapplying?
So I would say for tips for reapplying, really read what the reviewers have written carefully, and don't immediately jump to the conclusion that they are a bunch of idiots who don't know what they're talking about, even though I know that that is something that all of us feel like. But really try to look carefully at those reviews and to process them and to think about it and craft your reapplication carefully based on it. I'll tell you one example of an NIH grant that I reviewed a resubmission, and the response to reviewers' critiques was an entire page of the applicant talking about how the reviewers were idiots and we knew nothing about what it was that we had said, and really totally disregarded. And that was not received well. So be careful with how you write it.
We thank the reviewers for their constructive criticism, blah, blah. No, yeah.
Exactly. And try very hard to digest what it is that they've said and put a positive spin on how you've addressed that. And there was another part to that question, and I'm not remembering.
How long does it take to get the
How
summary
long does it
statement?
take? It depends. Usually for the NIH, you get a score within a couple of weeks. It might take a couple more weeks to get the digest of what it is. For the summary statement. For the American Heart Association, it's also, a couple of weeks. The NSF is a little bit longer. It takes them a couple of months to get things out.
Okay. I know, Mark, is your stuff relevant now, or can you say it when it's your turn to talk about I
wanted to say something about preliminary data. I can wait.
Okay.
Whatever you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, since there's so many students on board here, I want to make 2 points at once. One is that all of you have to do oral qualifiers, and it is important to know that preliminary data is absolutely not required for an oral qualifier. In fact, it can be a distraction because the oral qualifier is a test of your ability to think on your feet and how well you've thought about your project, not how much you've done. Having said that, grant writing is a different exercise. The grant review committee wants to know the legitimacy of your project. And it would help if either you or someone else in your lab had preliminary data to show that the project's legitimate. It does make a difference in grant writing. It does not make a difference in prelim taking. So that's my opinion on the grant world, but I'm confident in my assertion about what you need for your qualifier.
I totally agree with that. But I just want to caution students to think that they have to wait to get preliminary data to write a fellowship, because if you wait too late, you might not be thought of as still having the potential for training, and that could be a negative thing. So don't hold on submitting a fellowship application until you have the perfect amount of preliminary data. So that's just that caveat.
To put preliminary data in perspective, remember the NSF doesn't let you apply after your second year. So how much preliminary data could you really have? I mean, that puts a cap on it. You can't possibly have too much preliminary data for an NSF fellowship, and that's one of the main funding agencies. But knowing that a project is legitimate, and that doesn't have to be your work, it can be someone who's preceded you in your lab, is I think really significant.
True.
All right. There are more questions, but I would like to move on now to our panel, and Dr. Lutz and Teresa are still on, so they can answer questions as they come up. Before I move on to our panel, I'm just putting in the chat a link that you should all bookmark. This is a page on our new website that has boilerplate paragraphs that you can use for various sections: the responsible conduct of research, career development, rigor and reproducibility. These are all sections of grants that you will need to submit, and you can use these paragraphs almost verbatim. That is allowed. Everybody uses the same language from Rutgers because we have a standard, course in responsible conduct of research, for example. It also points you towards me. I have sample fellowships that some of the students who are going to be on the panel have provided us, as well as previous years. If you want to see successful applications, I can provide them to you. Teresa is not allowed to provide them to you through GradFund. So write to me. I have the permission of those students and PIs to share those successful applications, so you can see how they put stuff. And Carol says those on Newark can reach out to her as well. And then the institutional environment, also there are pages actually that we can help you with. So you're not in this alone. We're all here to support the process. All right, so I would like to move on now. We have 4 sets of PIs and students. I'll start with NIH since kind of that's how we were talking through most of the first hour. So Alex Yonk and David Margolis are representing the F31 Fellowship. So I don't know which of you wants to go first, but if you would like to just share, maybe Alex unmuted himself, David, whoever wants to go first.
I can take over for a bit.
Okay.
But so David and I were actually talking about this earlier, and there are a couple of tropes that actually Carol hit on perfectly, and they mimicked my own process of going through. So I got an F31 from NINDS. I applied 4 separate times for the award, and I was finally awarded on the second resubmission. And it was funny because after the first resubmission, it was scored fairly well. It had a little bit of a high impact factor, but the percentile was right near the funding cutoff. And I made the mistake, as Carol alluded to perfectly, of thinking that some of the reviewers' comments weren't as significant or important as I should have treated them. And I kind of answered them, pretty much did not answer them. And somehow, some way, that third reviewer, I still believe to this day, was the third reviewer on the resubmission itself. And they took that opportunity to basically bomb the grant. They gave 6s on a couple of the scores, whereas previously they were scoring 2s and 3s. So take those comments very, very seriously. Beyond that, another thing too, and Carol also hit on this too, is it's a training grant. So you need to focus on the training aspect of that. And what I did during my grant application was, at the end of a large paragraph or during the research strategy section, I included a small snippet called training potential. And I alluded back to how this would provide the guidance or some sort of skill that would be related to my ultimate career goal, which in this case is becoming an independent systems neuroscientist. There's a couple other ones I'd like to go over, but David, if you have any other comments you wanted to speak on as well.
Yeah, I think those are important points. So like Alex said, he had to be very persistent with his F31. So it did eventually go, was successful, but it took a lot of work, like you said, and that speaks to a larger issue that you'll encounter, all of you applying for these grants, is that there's a lot of arbitrariness in like the reviews that you get, and it's just something you have to put up with. Unfortunately, all of us applying, you might get a very wide spread of scores, like on you might get 1s and 2s from one reviewer, you might get 4s and 6s from another, right? And it comes down to a small number of reviewers, 2 or 3 reviewers that are scoring your grant. And so sometimes you really just have to keep trying, and it's almost out of your hands, right? One thing that I do want to mention, that it sounds like a small thing, but it turns out to be very, very important. And also, this is some advice coming from having sat on the review panels myself. Sometimes grants can be really, really good, but then they'll miss a really key, what seems like a minor thing, but is very important. So for example, specifying the sex of your experimental subjects, right? So NIH has a requirement that you have to specify the sex of your subjects. And I've been on a reviewer for grants that it's kind of tragic. They have really good grants, and then they forgot to mention if they're going to be studying male or female rats, let's say. And that's it. That grant, it cannot be put in the pool. It basically has to get a score of 5. It can't be, even if it's a great grant, it misses a very important criteria. And so it can't be scored as well as you want it to be. So anyway, just to the advice is just make sure you have your bases covered in terms of the guidelines. And this speaks to a larger point too that's come up before, of like, there are a lot of elements that go into the grant. It's not just the science. The training for training grants is like the F31 is seen as really critical. You almost have to frame all of the the whole project in terms of training. And that's something that, Alex has since helped some of his colleagues. So Brandon Sanabria is 1 year younger than Alex in the neuroscience program. He just got an F-31 in my lab also. He had an easier time. Actually, he got it after his first submission, but that might actually be partly because of the good advice that he got from Alex and looking at Alex's successful proposal. So that what came up before too, of trying to do your homework basically and look at as many applications that had been successful from other people. That's really, really helpful, because then that helps you see like, okay, it takes some of the mystery out of it. Like, this is a successful proposal, and you can look at it and you can see what's there, and then that can help you guide your own proposal.
Alex, how long before the application, the first time around, I guess, did you start? I mean, because there are so many sections that people sometimes think, oh, I'll just work on the science. And they're like, crap, I didn't realize I have to do all this other stuff.
That's a fantastic question. I started writing it in probably March or April, and the deadline is either I believe it's April 8th, August 8th, and December 8th. So I submitted on the August deadline, and I started writing in March. And partly because I love to plan ahead, I love to have everything set up and work through and do multiple rewrites of it. But you're going to need all the time, because even when I started in March, up until the last couple days before I submitted, I felt like I was revising everything. I felt like I was redoing figures and going to David for his comments on things. And it just takes a very, very long time to write.
Can you also sort of mention on the Rutgers side, like the paperwork, the budget, everything that you had to do and who you were interfacing with, like, because their deadlines are before the NIH grant deadlines, right?
Yes. Yeah. So Rutgers, you have to submit at least 2 days, if I'm not mistaken, to the grant review office. So they have an online system called RAPS, RAPSS, and they have all of the forms filled out for you in terms of what they need from Rutgers, but you have to go through and fill out the rest of your things. And so, as Janet was alluding to, it's not just the research strategy, your biosketch, and vertebrate animals. There's a whole bunch of other things in terms of equipment that you have to write down, facilities, sponsor, co-sponsor statements, letters of recommendation. All of these things have to be done and added onto it. And Rutgers pre-populates the majority of the forms for you, but you still have to fill it in with your writing. And those can either be PDFs or Word documents. But it has to be submitted to the grant office at least 2 days before. And in terms of interfacing with people, so I worked with our administrative assistant, our previous administrative assistant, Lauren, at the time in terms of the budget, because I'd have absolutely no idea how to do anything related to that. And also Jenny Torito, who I believe, I don't know if that's the grant specialist for everyone, but at least she was for me. There was a lot of back and forth between them because we were using biochemical agents, AAVs. They're technically considered a BSL-2 at Rutgers. So I had to have a select agents page. Our BHS had to go through, our EHS, excuse me, had to go through and validate all of those things. So there's a lot of moving parts, and the earlier you get the application done, or at least as close to done as possible, the smoother it will be in terms of the submission process.
Does anybody have any questions specific to Alex and David? David, do you have anything else to add as far as NIH goes? They'll be around the whole panel, so they can answer more, but. David, anything to add from your perspective as a mentor, and maybe like helping him with the training plan concepts?
It was a learning experience for me also too. That was my first F-31 proposal as a mentor. And so there is a lot of that, the mentor part of it is pretty extensive as well, as far as like the training. And so I actually learned what the advice I gave before about, trying to read as many grants as possible when you're applying. It was very helpful for me to read some other successful like mentor sections or people who've successfully done that before. Because it's not obvious how you should really do it. I mean, there's no, so it's very helpful to get that kind of help. And then and the advice also to, because I'm a recently tenured, I'm a relatively junior PI, and so it's very good advice to get a co-mentor on board, like that came up before from Carol, I believe. And so that is it's and also additional, like Alex had one collaborator on his project that we got a letter from at a different university about a mouse line, and so all of these pieces kind of help strengthen the application. But I don't think I have anything further right now.
One thing I will say related to that too, and I believe Carol alluded, Carol hit on a lot of things, which was awesome. One of the things is you don't just add on a co-sponsor to add on a co-sponsor, because the grant reviewers will nail you to the wall for that. They have to have some sort of tangible part of the project, either in terms of an experiment or a technique that you're doing or a certain type of analysis. You need to have a reason to put them on, not just because they have a lot of mentorship capabilities for students.
Right. And one thing we haven't mentioned, which sort of may not be obvious to everybody, is that you may not get the same set of reviewers when you resubmit. Typically with a manuscript you will, but with a grant it's not as guaranteed, if at all. So while you do have to respond very kindly and graciously to all of their comments and address them in one way or another, the reality is you could get a completely new set of reviewers the second time you submit and a whole new set of responses. So don't get disheartened. But along those lines, just real quickly, Alex, you said you submitted 4 times. Is that true?
Yes.
So did you submit once and then a revision and then have to start with completely new grant?
So that's kind of like the dirty little secret about it. It wasn't a completely new grant, but based on the comments that I got from the first resubmission, I drastically altered the plan. The overall goal was the same, but I changed up a lot of the techniques. I modified a lot of the protocols that we were using. So in my mind, and also in the NIH's mind at this point, it was technically a de novo submission.
Okay, so you're allowed 1 resubmission for NIH,
Yes.
but you ended up having 2 first and then 2 second submissions.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right, let's move on now to Yoliam and David Schreiber. So this is Yoliam. These are biomedical engineering student and faculty, and she got an NSF fellowship. So Yoliam, you want to share?
Yes, absolutely. Can everyone hear me well?
Yeah, it's a little echoey, but it's okay.
Sorry, I have the fan thingy on top of me, but it's okay.
It's
We'll
okay.
make it work. So yes, I applied. This was I submitted my application in fall of 2016, and I got back the results that I got it. I believe in March of 2017. The components of the application are a research proposal. It's a 2-page research proposal. There's also a personal statement. It's about 3 pages long, and you have to submit your academic transcripts, and you're required to submit 3 reference letters, and you can submit up to 5. I work with Dr. Schreiber on the research statement, the proposal, and it was really helpful just outlining the specific aims. And I also work a lot with the GradFund, and I am going to mention them many times because they were super helpful in terms of the main parts of the application, using words that you will find when you're reading the instructions of what you should include in the proposal and also in your personal statement. They were really great at that. And also one thing that Dr. Alder mentioned is asking for previous year's awardees to use that as a template. It's almost like a recipe where you can kind of organize things in a way where, the reviewer is more likely to, be interested in your proposal. So yeah, I am happy to share my proposals to anyone. I think Dr. Alder has it at this point. Yeah, I'm happy to answer questions. I don't know what I missed. And Dr. Schreiber, please jump in.
Why don't we let Dr. Schreiber talk and then we'll ask questions.
Well, be careful what you wish for, Janet.
I know what I'm getting into when I do
Hi, everybody.
that.
I'm Dave Schreiber, professor and chair in BME. So the NSF fellowship, and I'm sure Teresa talked about this, although I logged on in about 15 minutes ago. Carol's doing some kind of dance. It's very distracting. What was that? Hi. All right, let me recalibrate now. It's very different it's got a short research statement, 2 pages, as Jolie said, and it has an equally important personal statement. And I think what's important is that what you talk about with in your personal statement is integrated and contextualized with your research statement. So the NSF is really investing in the candidate, so much so that undergrads can apply and write a research statement, receive the fellowship, go to some school, and not do anything that's got anything to do with the research statement. So it's really an examination of how you can envision a project, describe that project, and weave in how it's motivated by your personal experiences. Jolie talked about including specific words or language that the proposal wants. So at the NSF, it's intellectual merit and broader impact. And you have to communicate, with absolute clarity how and why your proposal has intellectual merit and how you're going to impact people more broadly than just what the research describes. And that kind of leads to what I think is my most important point. For the NSF and somewhat for the NIH and other proposals, reviewer is going to get like a stack of proposals to read. And if you've ever TA'd a class and had to grade papers, it's so much better when the papers are clear and concise and well-written and easy to read, and you find everything that you need to find. There's no games with fonts and this and that. So you want to make it as easy for the reviewer to understand your story and why you're unique and what your research is and how it's motivated by your story, and to be memorable in a good way. And then when they're done with their stack of 50 papers, 50 grants, they're going to remember you. You want to stand out as being unique and meeting their criteria for merit and impact. And then you've got a good chance of winning, I think. You don't want to stand out for the wrong reasons. You certainly want to stand out for the right reasons. And I would say you want to be genuine and tell your story. So Jolie's got a great story of growing up in Puerto Rico on a dairy farm, and how that motivated her and it led her to different schools and to entrepreneurship, and how it fits in with the research that's proposed. It's something that's very memorable and exciting. And when they're done, the reviewer remembers that proposal, not just a run-of-the-mill, I had a family member that died of something, and so that's what motivated me. That you have to be more than that. I don't want anybody's parents to die, but you have to really weave in your personal feelings into that narrative. And I think that comes through when somebody reads it. Again, just think about you reading a stack of papers. One other thing is, on your first submission, you should tell your story the way you think it should be. And you can get input certainly from your advisor, have other people read it. And if they say, I really think you should do this or that, you can consider it. But you can't sit there and think about what every possible reviewer might say and how you're going to try to address every single little doubt or criticism that you might have about the research, because then you're going to have something that is totally unreadable. And then you're going to get specific reviewers, and they're going to give you specific feedback and criticism that you have to address, as we've discussed. But if you try to address everybody's criticism in a 2-page research statement, it's got to be longer than 2 pages, probably like 200 pages, and it's not going to make any sense. So sit down with your advisor, decide what you think are the most important things, what you think really needs to be addressed as a pitfall, an alternative, like the most obvious ones to you, and then wait to hear what the reviewers say. Hopefully they agree with you. Most of the time they don't, and they got other things to pick on, but then you've got some things that you can narrow it down to.
Am I correct that I know you can only apply during your first and second year? And if Teresa is available to chat for a moment, a little bit about the logistics in terms of timing there, because I know there was a question about that recently, about NSF eligibility. And also you can only apply once.
Right. So, that's a good question, an important question, Janet. So, as an applicant, you're eligible to apply for the NSF GRF before you come into graduate school. So in your last year of your undergrad, or if you're doing a gap year or two, before you come into graduate school, you can apply for the NSF GRF. Once you are in graduate school, you can apply once, and you have typically 2 moments of eligibility, and it's important to think about which moment do you want to use. And that is, you can apply in your first semester of your first year of graduate school, or you can apply in the first semester of your second year. And then I also want to say that if you have a master's degree, then there's another layer of regulation around what you can and cannot do. If enough time has passed between your master's degree and starting your PhD, you may be eligible to apply, but it will be in your first year. Once you hit the second year and you hold a master's degree, you're not eligible. So it's confusing. So ask questions and keep asking questions until you understand whether or not you're eligible. But back to this scenario of, you're a PhD student, you're in your first year, you don't have a master's degree. And the question is, do I apply now, right now, fall 2021, or do I wait until the fall of 2022? And what I will say is that, kind of to answer the question of why is this so confusing? Because in the infinite wisdom of NSF, they see the graduate fellowship as being primarily an award for very early career students. So as you're applying to graduate school, you apply for the NSF GRF, and that helps to facilitate moving you into the program that you want to go to. So what that means is that it is to your advantage to apply while you're an undergrad or while you're applying to graduate school. That moment has passed for everyone on this call. So now, applying in your first year is, I don't want to say it's easier, but it is less competitive than applying in your second year. And by that, I mean 2 important things are happening when you apply in your second year. Fewer awards go to second year applicants, and the review criteria, you're held to a higher standard. So that's an argument for applying in your first year. And like Dr. Schreiber said earlier, it's about writing a research statement and, demonstrating your potential. So even writing as a first year, it doesn't need to be the project you're going to work on for your dissertation. It needs to be an example of demonstrating your potential to succeed. When you're writing in your second year, they really are expecting you're starting to talk about your dissertation project and talking about it in a fair amount of detail. So, to me, it's a personal decision about whether or not you apply in your first year or your second year. What I can say about Rutgers applicants and their success at the graduate level is it really is 50-50. Half of our applicants apply in their first year and are successful. The other half that are successful have applied in their second year. So I think it's something that you want to talk about very carefully with your PI who knows you the best, and to think about what makes the most sense about when to apply.
But most first years don't have a PI.
So then, right, then, and that's something that's useful to think about, because you do want to be able to work with someone who's an expert in your field of study to give you feedback. So if you've been assigned a first year advisor who's able to help you, that's great. If you're, taking classes and you've made a good connection with one of your faculty members, that's great. And what I want to stress with those first years, especially those who are doing rotations, it is really talking about what are you interested in, And how will this facilitate your ongoing success? As a first year, you just need to make clear, I'm rotating, I haven't landed in a lab yet, but this is the kind of thing I'm interested in. This is how I would do this project. And that, how the NSF can help facilitate your success.
I wanted to ask a question. So the general perception of NSF is that they're interested in basic science, that they're not interested in translational, medically related curing diseases. Does that filter down to the pre-doctoral fellowship level?
Yes.
Okay, so
Yes.
Jolie, your application is pretty basic science, like what I call textbook biology, like or biomedical engineering, what's going to end up in a textbook, not what's going to end up in a therapy.
Yeah, and I have to say again, the GradFund was amazing at this, because every time I met with them, they're like, well, we have to change the language here. We want to focus on what they want you to focus on. And I work a lot with them in terms of that. I remember having to go back and schedule another meeting because it wasn't where it should be. So the GradFund was definitely very helpful on that.
I'd be a little more flexible with that, especially now. I mean, there's the NSF I-Core initiative. They're really looking to capitalize on translating the science that's done in their sponsored research into products. The important thing is that it's not like a clinical proposal, right? That it's not something that the NIH would fund. So you can study a clinical problem and explore the engineering that underlies it or whatnot, but it's not clinical research, and it's not clinically driven, let's say.
Right, but I will jump in here and say that I have a student who submitted an NSF application last year and did not work with GradFund and was not awarded because it was thought to be too medically relevant. So bottom line here is work with GradFund.
And then in the last 30 seconds before we move on to the other one, the concept of broader impact and how you are going to contribute to the larger community, I think is also very important to NSF. Can you both speak about that briefly?
Yeah, so it's critically important. So one important way to think about this is there are these two review criteria: broader impacts, intellectual merit, and they carry equal weight. So it means that you've got to address both of them in a robust way. Now, broader impacts, it's about, what's the societal benefit of funding you as a student on the NSF GRF? So that can be about your research. It's also about you, though, as a research scientist. What are you doing to make science more broadly accessible, whether that's your specific research or science in general? And so a couple of key things to think about. I mean, examples of broader impacts can be things like, attending a science day at a local high school and sharing science with the kids. It can be that you are doing public writing on science. It can be that you're, attending a science fair and also once again, interacting with young kids and science. It could be that you're doing some kind of community outreach program that brings young people into the lab to begin to experience what is it like working in a science lab and what does this look like, how to broaden participation in these ways. And you want to have these examples, but they also the reviewers need to see evidence that this is something that you've been doing that's ongoing, right? Like the strategy of saying, I really haven't been engaged with the world. But I'm going to now talk about how I'm engaged with the world because I'm applying for NSF. So I'm going to suddenly sign up to do a bunch of science fairs to, do science outreach to a bunch of kids. That's not going to work for you because there won't be the durable evidence that this has been something that you've been doing ongoing. So, the way I like to encourage students to think about it is that if you have been doing things that involve science outreach, community outreach, thinking about broader impacts, and that's part of what you do ongoing, then the NSF is a good match for you. If you haven't been doing that for whatever reason, it's going to be hard to be competitive for the NSF.
Jolie, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that in terms of broader impacts, I see it more of like something that comes genuine to you and that you're not like forcing it just so you can check boxes. And the way I treated it, I remember that there was at the end of the proposal, there was a paragraph that was just addressing that, but also in the personal statements, a lot of like from undergrad and high school, I have been doing a lot of outreach. So this is something that I actually enjoy. And I used it almost as the personal statement, which is something that I wanted to add. I created some sort of like timeline that had the research experiences and also what I was doing in terms of outreach all together. And it created a timeline from this is where I was when I was in undergrad. This is where I think I am now and where I want to go. And I added those things in there. So it didn't sound like forced. And it's very important that, you know, it comes through without like pushing it too much that, you know, you care about these things.
Great advice. Thank you. All right. I hope you stick around in case there's more questions. I'm going to spotlight now Paul and Mark. They are, where did Mark go? Oh, there you are. So many people. So they're going to talk about the New Jersey Commission grants, specifically New Jersey Commission on Cancer Research is what they applied for. But many of you may not realize that New Jersey collects $1 from every moving violation, speeding ticket, etc. My husband got one last night in New York. Too bad it wasn't over the border. That supports research in cancer, spinal cord injury, autism, and brain injuries. So take it away, guys.
So, hey, everybody. I guess we had a very exciting and a somewhat frustrating application process when it came to this. We initially developed my thesis proposal into a grant that we applied to with the NIH first for an F-31 grant, which didn't work out because F-31s, the organization, the NIGMS, that normally supports the basic research that our lab would do, no longer supports F-31s. And when we tried to get a different organization to support it, they just refused. They said that our research didn't fit well enough. So we eventually transferred over to working with NJCCR, and the application for the NIH F-31 grant was actually very, very similar to that with NJCCR. So it was really easy to just take what we had already written and just rework it for this grant. And I know Mark said we had gotten grants through them. He had gotten grants through them previously, and it was just a very easy transition.
How was it to work with the SAGE system? So SAGE is the online portal that you use for New Jersey grants, and I find it cumbersome.
I was very, very lucky to work closely with our grant administrator, Jamie Carr, and we kind of figured it out together. It was difficult to begin with, but like after you sit with it for a little while, you get used to it.
Mark, what would you like to say about the process? I mean, and the fact that you had also applied for F-31s, if you have any input on that versus NJ.
Right. I just make four comments of things that I'll answer that question, make 3 comments that have come to my mind as we've talked today. One was that, as Paul said, NIGMS doesn't accept F-31s anymore, at least the straight up one we wanted to apply for. And we tried to pigeonhole ourselves into another granting, another NIH institute. And it didn't work. We couldn't make our research not sound like basic research. And so they saw through that. Despite the massive amount of work that we did to create the grant, they said no pretty quickly. So that was a lesson learned. Having said that, we could take our NIH application and very easily streamline it into something for the New Jersey Commission for cancer research. So that was straightforward. So regarding the things that I've heard that I wanted to comment on, there was some comments here about what do you do about reviewers' comments. When you first see a reviewer's comments, I think it is a universal feeling of outrage. How could they not see the brilliance of your grant? And that's a fine thing to feel. But when it comes time to respond to the reviewers, I think they are always right. And it's tough to come around to that. But I think in my heart of hearts, I've come to learn that if you can't convince the reviewer of your intelligence, that's not necessarily the reviewer's fault. There's a communication, sometimes it's a communication issue, because you need to be able to communicate your grant to the dumbest person on the panel. And so that requires something extra of the grant writer. And so if you feel that the reviews are coming from someone who just isn't informed, that's telling you you need to work harder on how to inform them of your brilliance. And so I don't believe it's the reviewer's fault. It falls on the grant writer. So I don't say any of this facetiously. I mean, I really think that a great grant may need to be told a couple different ways before you find the way that reviewers can accept it well. And that burden is on the grant writer. So that's point number one. The second point I want to make really isn't for the students on the panel, it's for the PIs. But as students who are interested in grants, I hope you can relate this to your PIs. And that is for student, for example, the NIH grant for the student has lots of areas that the PI is supposed to write about training of the student. And the PI can assume that this is all fluff, which I did until we decided to sit down and write the grant. At the last minute, I discovered that there were huge portions that I needed to think about how to develop Paul's training. And so if I can encourage every student here to get the message to their PI that this is actually going to be something that they may not be used to writing if they haven't written student grants or haven't helped a student write a grant before, this is going to be a burden that they are unprepared for. And it will take time. So in working with your PIs, if they are not used to doing this on a regular basis, your job is to get them involved early so that they can deal with the burden that is ahead of them. And then the last point is with regard to designing a project, a training for your student for those portions, there's no prescribed formula as to what to write. And so a lot of PIs, when encountering this, are going to scratch their head and say, I'm not quite exactly sure what should go here. So there's two things I would say. One is looking at what others have done before you is a gold mine, because someone has thought this through and can help give you ideas about what to write. But the second thing I would say is just because someone else has written X, Y, and Z doesn't mean that's the only solution to the problem. The reason why there's no prescribed formula is because there are many ways to teach students, and each PI and student combination can find a unique solution for their student. And in fact, the more unique, the more interesting that part of the grant will be. If you end up following the boilerplate of what everyone else does at Rutgers, eventually I imagine this is going to be stale. And a reviewer who has seen a grant from Rutgers before might start to recognize patterns and say, I've seen this before. And so finding a unique solution for you and your student would be advantageous. So those are the four statements that I thought of while waiting our turn.
Yeah, I know Mark and I worked very, very closely when writing, going through this entire process. I know NJCCR wasn't as heavy on the student portion. Like the F31 has a big portion on like your personal goals and things like that. And Mark and I worked very, very closely with going through all of that and what's the best way to communicate my goals as a student. And then a lot of that ended up getting thrown out when we moved over to the NJCCR. But it's really important to be just in constant communication with your mentor, your PIers, whoever, what GradFund, and working very closely with taking your thoughts and developing them into a a written language that other people will be interested to read and read easily.
Right. And just, I mean, for some of you who are probably thinking like, what is this training plan? What kinds of things are they talking about? It's the idea of like, how are you going to get opportunities to go present your research at local meetings, national meetings, international meetings? How are you going to increase your skill set in computational areas, or, you know, things that are going to make you a well-rounded scientist and able to have a productive career in the future? So that's what they're talking about. How are we going to make sure that you learn the techniques, but the statistical analysis, and those are the kinds of things they're looking for when they talk about training plan. Another thing I just wanted to bring up is a phrase we haven't used, which is grantsmanship. So writing a grant isn't writing a fellowship is like an art. It's telling a story. It's convincing the reviewer that this is a full package. And I don't want to say that you don't necessarily have to do what you propose in the grant, but you want to tell a compelling story in the grant. And what you end up doing for your research, if it doesn't match perfectly, that's okay. Things change, and it has to be believable. It has to be doable, feasible, what you're proposing, but don't feel like when you go to do your project, like, oh, I proposed it this way in my grant, and now I realize it might be better that way, but I'm going to have to stick to what I did in my grant. That's not true. All right.
I think already I'm deviating from what I wrote in my grants. We've developed new experiments already just from data we got after we wrote the grant, and we're already changing stuff.
Right. And you know, you'll still have to submit annual reports, and you explain why you changed it, and that's okay. Cool. All right. I hope you guys stick around in case something else comes up, but I'm going to turn it. Sorry, I don't know why I muted myself. Turn it over to our last set of panelists, and that is Thushara and Dr. Lauren Runnels. So if you guys can unmute yourselves, and Thushara, if you want to go first, or I don't know who's going first.
Hi, everybody. So we, Dr. Reynolds and I, we applied for the AHA fellowship, pre-doctoral fellowship. So the application was due last December, and we had to get it on it was on December 1st. We heard back, I think by the end of March, very last minute. So we actually thought I actually thought I didn't get it. I was just checking just to make sure. That was a funny moment. I think with the application process, one of the main things that we focused on was to make sure that our proposal was completely in alignment with the goals of the fellowship. So because this was AHA, it was based on like stroke and that. So we made sure that my project was anyway based on stroke, but we made sure that all the proposals and all the experiments, everything was right in alignment with that goal. And we never really deviated from that. It wasn't really hard to do, to kind of realign everything and to make sure, you know, we are right with that. We are right with that goal. The other thing that I learned from Dr. Reynolds was to include my training aspect of it. So up until this point, I was like, okay, we're proposing experiments. So, you know, we have listed all the experiments we're going to do. I would naturally get trained, but then there was a section where we had to write about myself. And in that, I made sure, okay, these are the training that I would be receiving for the duration of my fellowship. And I realized now that that was a very, very important part of the application. The other thing, the application process, it was through Proposal Central, which wasn't that bad. But there were a lot of points, there were a lot of sections to cover. So that does take a little bit of time. We had to, the main part, at least from my point of view, the main two things to submit was a research plan, which was like, it shouldn't be too, there was like a word limit. So it couldn't be like super long. And then there was another section where I write about my previous experiments and my grades and previous research experiments and things like that. So it wasn't too bad. The writing wasn't too long. It wasn't too bad. Fun fact about the AHA, you need to have a membership before you can submit the application. I did not know this, and it was very last minute that I realized I had to do this. Thankfully, I got it in time to get my reference ID. I did not tell you this, Dr. Reynolds, but I thankfully managed to get my reference ID and get it in time to submit the proposal. So beware of that with the AHA. And the other thing, going along with Dr. Gardenberg said, we did try to make my proposal very unique. Right, it wasn't something that we've been. It's something that, you know, others have done. We really sure to show it as very unique and something that has not been previously explored. And I think that that also kind of helped the application. So these are some of the points I have.
But it's hard to follow the Shara. I think that was very thoughtful. I'll just add a couple things, because I think a lot of points have been covered, but there's a few that I think haven't been. So I think one is, I just want to bring attention to the fact for the AHA grant, when they're evaluating the grant, only 35% of the score is actually based upon the research plan. The other large portion is based upon the investigator themselves, the research environment, as well as the training plan. So you want to make sure you're well balanced in sort of preparing your application so that you are really sort of putting effort into those other areas as well. So you don't want to spend like 99% of your time on the research plan and at the last second just try to sort of go through those other portions of the application, because they're weighted pretty heavily as well. I actually was on a review panel for a different type of American Heart Grant, which is the career development plan. And it was quite interesting sort of to be on that panel, because you really have to sort of weigh sort of what's written in terms of the training plan and the environment and the investigator. So we really looked at sort of the qualifications of the investigator. And then for pre-doctoral fellowship, you're really looking at grades. And I think it's something that I didn't hear mentioned, at least I'm not too sure if I did, was letters of recommendation, right? So one thing, I would just recommend is sort of really create or carve out that space so that you can get all the elements of your application done. So that means reaching out to people that would write letters of recommendation for you, giving them time to understand exactly what you're applying for, and emphasize that training is an important part of the application. Some letter writers will write not just information about the candidate themselves, but we'll also include information on the PI, saying that it's a good environment for the person to be trained. So that can be helpful as well. And I think Dashara touched on the fact that it's nice for the training plan to be sort of tailored to sort of the needs of the student. And so when Dashara entered my grad, she really emphasized how she was interested in neuroscience. And we had long conversations on what sort of training she was really looking for. And so when reading those training plans as a reviewer, it was really easy to tell the training plans in which the PI was really reflecting on sort of what the training needs of the student, because you would see a lot of there'd be echoes of what the student want that would sort of appear sort of in the training plan from the PI. So so you do want to be thoughtful about it. So so I think what my advice to students really is to take a leadership role in informing your PIs, right? What's needed to be in the grant, and then where possible, give your PIs some examples of fellowships that have been successful before, and that way they'll have some idea on what to write. Scheduling some time just separate from the writing, just to discuss with your PI what your training goals are. That's really important. And then lastly, the only other thing I would add is the Shara said, you really do want to have your research plan be related to the mission of the funding agency. In this case, American Heart is really interested in cardiovascular disease and stroke. And so if your research proposal is more aligned with that research mission, you'll have a better chance of success. So really, I guess it would boil down to, be thoughtful about what you're proposing. Don't underestimate the time that you should spend on the training plan and those other documents which are part of the application, because we're asked to sort of, score those individual portions. And so if you're not doing a good job on those, that will sort of hurt your chances. And even something like the lay summary, for your grant, which you might say, oh my God, I forgot to do this. We're asked to score it. It counts 5% of your grant, and it could be the difference between your grant being funded and not funded. So just put effort into everything and just do your best. And I think GradFund is an amazing resource. And from what I've heard from this presentation, they're extremely knowledgeable. So I think leaning on their expertise makes a lot of sense to me. And then I myself have reached out to Dr. Alder in the past for support, examples of applications for different types of grants. So I highly recommend that as well. So I think that sums it up for me.
Thank you, both of you. Just about the mission idea, first of all, Carol Lutz did put in the chat, she says the new mission of the AHA is something like building healthier lives, which is really quite broad. So maybe they are expanding. Through Shara is an international student, so she's a good example. And I know Dr. Reynolds has had success from previous international students with American Heart Association. So that's a really good one for people to focus on. But then when I was I was a postdoc, but I know they have pre-doc ones too, had a grant from the Damon Runyon Cancer Research Foundation. And my research was on neuroscience and the cerebellum and how cell fate is specified during development. Nothing to do with cancer research, but I did relate it to when a cell in the cerebellum starts to proliferate without breaks, that it becomes a glioblastoma. So I was able to relate my research to the broader mission, even though I wasn't studying cancer. So there are ways to spin things for sure.
But you want to address it for sure. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. We have 4 minutes. If anybody has questions for any of the panelists, please feel free to type them in the chat. I'll take this opportunity while we're just waiting for those questions to come in to thank the speakers, all of them, Dr. Teresa Del Corso, Carol Lutz, all of our students who have graciously given their time and shared their expertise in writing grants, and the PIs, of course, who are the backbone of this process. Anybody have any questions? I'm sure they would be happy to be a resource for you if you have questions about the logistics of applying in the future after today. And again, Carol and I are around for providing successful fellowships or just general advice, and GradFund is GradFund.
Janet, there's one thing I'd like to add if I could.
Sure, please.
So I think one thing I didn't hear anyone say, but I think it's helpful to be strategic and sort of going after what type of certain fellowships. So for example, the New Jersey grants are only sort of available to, institutions in New Jersey. And so, just playing the odds, that might be worth going after. In American Heart, fewer people go after those grants, whereas the F-31s, you're competing against everyone in the nation. So, that's something to keep in mind as well.
Right.
Can I say something real quick, Janet?
Yeah, go ahead, David.
So, and maybe it was said at the very beginning, you got to be in it to win it, right? 100% of grants that aren't submitted are not funded.
Right.
So I think we've talked a lot about rejections and strategy and the competition and the funding rates. It's a really great exercise to write a fellowship. It really helps clarify the research in your mind. It helps identify strengths and weaknesses. And if you don't apply, you're not going to win.
We did
Along
mention
those
that
lines-
we did mention that earlier on, but I like ending on that same message.
Can I just say one last thing to you about
David.
that? Because it came up with NSF that the broader impacts is really important, but of course previous service really helps, but you should, in the same philosophy, like you should still go for it and relate your research to broader impacts, even if you don't have a super strong track record of outreach and service, because that's an opportunity for you to do that. So I would still encourage people to do that with NSF.
Okay. Very true. All right. Well, happy Friday, everyone. Thank you again to everybody for attending the panel and for listening, and good luck to all of you who are applying. Join us in the spring for our specific Ames writing workshop. And also there are courses you can take in the spring that are listed on the website that I posted in the chat. Have a good day, everyone.
Have a nice weekend.